Well, I've got my Mandalorian Christmas jumper on, I've got my Mandalorian Lego figures right here. What else can I say? This is the way.
Show me the one whose safety deemed such destruction. You must reunite it with its own kind.
Where?
This you must determine. The songs of eons past tell of battles between Mandalore the Great and an order of sorcerers called JEDI.
You expect me to search the galaxy and deliver this creature to a race of enemy sorcerers?
This is the way.
How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Luke's TV Reviews, and on this episode we are off to a galaxy far, far away as we reunite with everyone's favourite bounty hunter and his adopted son. This is my review for The Mandalorian Season 2. And it should come as no surprise, a huge spoiler warning here. If you have not yet seen The Mandalorian Season 2, I strongly advise you to check out some of my other videos and then come on back once you are all caught up with the second season of The Mandalorian. Because we're going to be diving in head first. We've got a lot to talk about. So here goes. When we last left Mando and the gang, they had seemingly just defeated Moff Gideon, and the Mandalorian officially accepted the challenge of reuniting the child with his own kind. Season 2 follows this journey as we begin to learn more about the child and discover where his and Mando's destiny lie. Right, this review is going to work slightly differently because of how impactful each episode is, and with only 8 episodes in the season, it just seemed a bit easier to kind of go through episode by episode, give my general thoughts and feelings of what I liked in that episode, some interesting Star Wars tidbits, and then kind of give my overview of the entire season at the end. And first up, co-creator of the show Jon Favreau turned his hand to finally directing an episode of The Mandalorian for the season premiere. This was an ideal episode to get the ball rolling and tease us for what is to come in this season. It was always a pleasure to return to Tatooine, although this time we're not staying in established places like Mos Eisley or Mos Espa. Instead, we're going to a far-off outpost called Mos Pelgo that's way off in the middle of the desert, and it's protected by someone who is supposedly a possible Mandalorian. Lo and behold, any keen Star Wars fan would probably spot that when Cobb Vanth enters the bar, well, that isn't any old Mandalorian armor, but more on him later. I thought that Timothy Olyphant was a really welcome addition to the universe, and Cobb Vanth, who was a character that was initially introduced in the Star Wars novel Aftermath by Chuck Wendig, meant to me that Favreau and Filoni are definitely tapping into these extra materials that aren't just the movies and TV shows. We're going to be going into books, possibly video games. No one, in my opinion, understands Star Wars better than Dave Filoni. Quick, bite-sized history. He worked with George Lucas on the Clone Wars, and basically Lucas taught Filoni everything he knows. So Dave Filoni is basically this encyclopedia of Star Wars knowledge, and he can translate that beautifully onto the products that he's in charge of, with Clone Wars, with Rebels, and now with The Mandalorian. I thought that Jon Favreau did a great job directing this episode, especially with the climactic battle, as the village people joined forces with the Tusken Raiders, of all people, to defeat the Krayt Dragon, and it was a thrilling sequence that immediately set the tone that this second series was clearly striving to be bigger and better. Oh, and to close out the episode, we seemingly get the long-awaited confirmation that Temuera Morrison is returning as Boba Fett, but more on him just to come. Directed by Ant-Man director Peyton Reed, The Passenger was probably the weakest episode of the series, but that's not necessarily to say that it was a bad episode. It's just that in terms of the main story, I don't think a great deal happened. It was a fun little side mission. The Mandalorian is always kind of known for having these episodes where they sometimes resemble that of a video game. You have your main underlying story, and then you have small little side quests that you've got to complete. This kind of felt a bit like a side quest, where at the end of the first episode, he's got to transport the fish lady to the planet Trask, of which they know a contact that can get him in touch with a Mandalorian. The Mandalorian can then help him take to Baby Yoda where he needs to go. So yeah, it's a little confusing, I know, but I like that this episode kind of threw a hurdle in the way, because the Razor Crest is damaged when under pursuit by these X-Wing pilots. Funnily enough, those X-Wing pilots were the ones that popped up in the Prison Break episode in Season 1. One of those pilots actually being Dave Filoni himself. And it was entertaining. It was an easy 40 minutes spent. It was a fine episode. It had some good comedy with the child being fascinated with eating the fish lady's eggs. Some definite scares if you've got arachnophobia, because those spiders are big. But realistically, there was nothing major to take from this episode. Now this is when things got really interesting. Having somewhat of a dubious landing on Trask, Mando finally meets some fellow Mandalorians who can help him on his journey, and that's when we're introduced to Axe Wolves, Cosca Reeves, who's played by WWE superstar Mercedes Varnado, or better known as Sasha Banks, and the long-awaited live-action debut of Bo-Katan, played by Katee Sackhoff, who also voiced the character in the Clone Wars series and Rebels. Now, despite being a slightly shorter episode, this was jam-packed full of amazing action, courtesy of Katan and co, but also some groundbreaking story developments. First came the reveal that Bo-Katan is after the Darksaber, a weapon that we last saw in the possession of Moff Gideon during the finale of Season 1. And also having a deep canonical history in the Star Wars universe, as it's a direct tie to Mandalore, with whoever is the wielder being the rightful ruler of the planet, and seeing as Bo-Katan is the sister of Duchess Satine, who at one point was the ruler of Mandalore, it's quite obvious why she wants that Darksaber so desperately. Seeing Bo-Katan return in all of her glory was an absolute treat for Star Wars fans, especially if you are familiar with her in the Clone Wars series. I thought that it was a great pick to have Katee Sackhoff come back. I thought Bryce Dallas Howard smashed it out of the park with her direction, and then the mother of all bombshells dropped, as Bo-Katan gives Mando his next task to complete.
Take the Foundling to the city of Caladan on the forest planet of Corvus. There you'll find AHSOKA Tano.
And the Star Wars fandom reacted like this.
Oh my god! Okay, it's happening! Everybody stay calm!
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm!
But we're going to have to wait, because there is one more step before we get even close to meeting AHSOKA. I had gathered that we weren't going to go straight from one major groundbreaking episode to another, and considering that I'd heard reports that Dave Filoni was going to be directing Chapter 13, it made sense that he would be the one to help bring a live-action AHSOKA to The Mandalorian. So I'd kind of tempered my expectations that this was going to be a bit of a filler episode, and we return to Navarro and we're reunited with Cara Dune and Greef Karga. It was great to spend time with these characters again, and we also got some very welcome antics of the child attending a school and using the Force to nab some snacks. But the main meat of this episode was the siege itself. Mando, Cara Dune, and Greef Karga are joined by Mithril, who you might remember from the pilot episode, as they seek to uncover basically this secretive Imperial outpost on the planet. Walking around the corridors, it felt very much like A New Hope, and a speeder chase through the caverns was just textbook Star Wars action. It was great. But the biggest revelation was that Moff Gideon has created a new type of soldier, the Dark Troopers. And he's also after the child to harvest him for his blood, specifically focusing on the midichlorian count. There are also these suspicious-looking bodies in Bacta tanks. Now, personally, if you keep an ear out, and if you're a film score aficionado like myself, you might notice there being particular music cues of a certain John Williams track from The Force Awakens. I'm specifically talking about his theme for Snoke. So it seems possible that these bodies could be a link to the Empire experimenting to bring Snoke to life, who, as we know from The Rise of Skywalker, was a clone being puppeteered by the Emperor. But theories aside, I thought this was a kick-ass episode, and it helped set the building blocks for what is to come over the next game-changing couple of episodes. Also, hashtag Gene's Guy comeback. One factor I really appreciated in the build to Season 2 was that the trailers didn't seem to give too much away. And that was especially clear because by the time Chapter 12 ended, we had seen every shot that was in the trailers. So what was to come was completely unknown. We had absolutely no idea what to expect. And the Jedi, this episode was probably my favourite of the season. And it's an episode that I think will probably be a defining moment in Star Wars history. After so much speculation, we finally saw the live-action debut of Ahsoka Tano, a character near and dear to Star Wars fans' hearts. She initially debuted in the Clone Wars to a less than stellar reception, but over time her character progressed into one of the most fascinating, driven by her connection to Anakin Skywalker, something that she referenced in the episode, if you were able to catch it.
I've seen what such feelings can do to a fully trained Jedi Knight. To the best of us.
Now, I always loved Ashley Eckstein, who provided the voice in the animated shows, and I've always been a bit skeptical as to who could take over the mantle. I mean, I would have loved to have seen Ashley Eckstein in a live-action format, but I kind of thought that they might get a slightly bigger name to play Ahsoka, and they did, and they got Rosario Dawson, who absolutely crushed it. Dave Filoni assumed directing responsibilities, and boy did he come out swinging. Not only was the action goddamn brilliant between Ahsoka and the Magistrate, side note, I want this picture framed, but we got some groundbreaking revelations. For starters, this is no longer the child. Everyone, meet Grogu. We learn that he was a youngling at the Jedi Temple, but managed to escape when Anakin attacked, and has been alone ever since, hence why he's created such a close bond with Mando. We also got some earth-shattering revelations, because at the climax of the Ahsoka Magistrate fight, Ahsoka is asking her, "Where is your master? Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?" Now, for those who aren't aware, Grand Admiral Thrawn was first introduced to the Star Wars universe in a series of novels by Timothy Zahn released in the 90s. Now, when Disney bought Star Wars, they kind of cherry-picked what could be considered canon, and everything else was just discarded as legends. Timothy Zahn's Thrawn novels and the character of Grand Admiral Thrawn got chucked in with the legends. Now, what that meant is that a lot of fans really enjoyed the character of Grand Admiral Thrawn. He was this menacing Imperial officer that just would not care who stood in his way. He was so tactical, and a villain unlike anything the Star Wars universe had seen. And Filoni, knowing how much this meant to the fans and how much it could mean to the universe if he was incorporated, brought Thrawn back into Season 3 of Rebels, and it was voiced by Lars Mikkelsen, who I thought did a fantastic job. And at the climax of Rebels, spoilers for Rebels by the way, although if you're watching this, I'd imagine that you've probably seen Rebels already. At the climax of Rebels, Ezra, accompanied with the space whales, has used the Force to teleport the hell out of there. Now, it's not really explained where he's gone, or if there's time travel involved. That was a rumour I read floating about, but Thrawn went with him. So, what this means is that Ahsoka is now after Grand Admiral Thrawn, potentially now trying to locate Ezra too, and I think that is going to have a gigantic impact and is very clearly setting the stage for the Ahsoka spin-off show that was announced on the Disney Investor Day, and that just sounds cool. I really love the look of this episode too. Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau have always been quite vocal that the aim of the show was to create a Western, a Star Wars Western show. And that's been very apparent in a lot of episodes. But obviously the stereotypical Western has always been inspired by Japanese samurai. And that was very much the approach that Filoni took with this episode, an approach that I was really delighted to see. But an aspect that I was quite taken aback by was that Ahsoka just point-blank refuses to train Grogu. She references the fact that the connection between Mando and Grogu is too strong, and that Grogu fears too much about losing Mando, and as we know, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering, and that's a path to the dark side. So what she suggests is to take him to the planet Tython, where there are the remnants of an old Jedi temple, to place Grogu on this stone so he can connect with the Force and basically send out a signal so that any Jedi will know that he's out there willing and ready to be trained. But who could that Jedi be? We'll have to wait and see. Dave Filoni is at his best when he is fundamentally changing the landscape of Star Wars, and he did such a good job at helming this episode. Well, how do you follow the previous episode? I mean, for starters, you can give everyone a heart attack and show them that title. I was a bit cautious that this was just going to be another filler episode, similar to how we went from episode 3 or chapter 11 straight onto chapter 12, and it was kind of biding our time slightly, but not at all. We're straight on Tython. Mando and Grogu are jetpacking on the way to the Jedi Temple. We are right into it. And this episode really reinforced the bond that Mando and Grogu have, because when Grogu is connecting with this Force, it kind of creates this impenetrable Force barrier around him, and when shit hits the fan and Mando's trying to save Grogu and get him out of there so nothing bad happens to him, he's constantly being flung back, but he continually tries, he keeps trying, he's not willing to give up on just leaving Grogu be. And once Grogu's on that stone, what pops into frame but Slave 1. Boba Fett is back, and boy is it good to see. And he's joined by Ming-Na as Fennec Shand, who comes back from the dead after the events of the Gunslinger episode from last season. Now, I really dug the exchange between Mando and Fett about kind of Mandalorian code of conduct. Fett is purely after his armor. He doesn't really care what Mando has got going on. He is just desperate for his father's armor, and he references the fact that Django fought in the Mandalorian Civil War, because now it just doesn't advance him as a character, it creates more of this intriguing history about who Django was. But the highlight of this episode was the onslaught of action. It was a short episode, I think one of the shortest in the season, but boy, was it jam-packed full of action. Robert Rodriguez directed the episode, and I love just how much of a gritty feel it had with the action when Boba Fett is just absolutely cleaning out the stormtroopers with his gaffy stick. But Fett donning his armor and absolutely wrecking shop did more to cement him as the badass of Star Wars than anything previous had done. And it ends on the biggest cliffhanger. The Razor Crest is blown to bits, the Dark Troopers were deployed, and Grogu is now in the hands of Moff Gideon. But the message was sent. So who is going to answer the call? We'll have to wait and see. I thought that this was such a great episode, and probably the most thrilling half an hour of Star Wars we've ever seen. As the previous episode drew to a close, we saw Mando visit Cara Dune in an effort to recruit her and Bill Burr's character, who appeared in Season 1, to try and get Grogu back. But in typical Mandalorian fashion, they've got a mission to complete that will then give the information to then complete their overall task. And despite being a filler episode in which Mando and Mayfield infiltrate this Empire base to locate the coordinates so they can find Moff Gideon's cruiser and eventually find Grogu, it actually served as a really nice development piece for both Mayfield's character and Mando's. We learned that Mayfield had a controversial past serving with the Empire, and in a brilliant conversation with this douchebag Imperial officer, his resentment towards the Empire is apparent as he eventually just snaps and blasts a hole in the officer. As for Mando, well, there's that rule that he lives by, that he cannot remove his helmet in front of others, but he's willing to put that life mantra aside in order to save Grogu. It shows how much he's changed as a character from the first episode. Director Rick Famuyiwa also reminds us how good of a fighter Mando actually is, with the thrilling action sequence on these trucks containing Rhydonium, which is this incredibly explosive material that is being constantly attacked by these pirates. And it was again just textbook Star Wars action executed to perfection. Oh, And I can guarantee that every Star Wars fan lost their minds when BOBA dropped this quite literal bomb. So good. And so the table was set for what could be an incredible season finale. Grogu is captured. Mando, Cara Dune, Boba Fett, Fennec Shand recruit Cosca Reeves and Bo-Katan to board Moff Gideon's cruiser and save Grogu. And good God Almighty, Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, Peyton Reed. Wait a second. I take my hat off to you all. Even though The Jedi was probably my favourite episode personally, The Rescue is some of the best Star Wars content that we've had since The Empire Strikes Back. The entire assault on the cruiser was so cool. Fennec, Dune, Bo-Katan, Reeves, they make for a seriously kick-ass quartet that I would happily watch endlessly. Seeing Mando take on that Dark Trooper was really cool too, as you realise just how formidable these troopers are. And then Moff Gideon versus Mando was a fight we've been waiting for ages, with the Beskar steel against the Darksaber. Visually, it was gorgeous. But narratively, it was a huge development for Mando, because now he's in possession of the Darksaber. Because Bo-Katan can't just claim it back, she has to basically win it in combat. So, right now, objectively speaking, Din Djarin is the ruler of Mandalore. Much to the annoyance of Bo-Katan. But you know I have to talk about it at some point. The Dark Troopers are back, and they've cornered our heroes in the bridge of the ship. They're waiting in the corridor, and they are just pounding through those doors. Our guys are dead any second, and then one solo X-Wing flies into frame, and it lands in the cruiser. We see a cloaked figure march through the corridors. They bust out a lightsaber, and my mind is going crazy. Could it be Ezra Bridger? Is he back? Could it be Cal Kestis from the Jedi Fallen Order video game? Could it be Mace Windu? Because, you know, he might have survived the fall. But as soon as that green lightsaber swung by the camera, there was only one person it could be. Luke Skywalker. Oh, Jesus Christ. Was this pretty much fan service? Sure. Did the CGI de-aging of Mark Hamill look a little rough? Absolutely. Did it bother me in the slightest? No. Because I squealed with excitement like a little schoolboy. Because we're seeing Luke Skywalker at the height of his powers, and regardless of what you think of the sequel trilogy's depiction of Luke, where he's this much more cautious master who's kind of got PTSD and suffering from the failures that he had when he was training Kylo Ren, this is Luke just absolutely cleaning house with the Dark Troopers. Like father, like son, I guess, because that hallway scene, similar to Rogue One with Darth Vader, this was the Luke Skywalker that everyone has wanted to see. Whether you grew up with the original trilogy and you wanted to see how Luke had progressed from the end of Return of the Jedi, or you're like me and you've picked it up from watching it with your family, it was I'm beyond words. It's perfect. But what goes up must come down. And with the euphoric high of seeing Luke Skywalker, it did also mean that we would have to have a temporary farewell to Grogu. Because Luke takes away Grogu to be trained, and it was a heartbreaking goodbye between Mando and Grogu. He takes off his helmet so he can see his face for the first time, so he can remember him, and he promises him that I will see you again. And then R2 shows up, and I love it. And that's how it ends. Well, kinda. There is a little post-credits teaser. We are back on Tatooine, and we pan over to Jabba's palace. We see Bib Fortuna now in control, and then Fennec comes in and absolutely cleans house, leaving only Bib Fortuna and one of the other slaves. And then Boba comes back. He blasts Bib straight in the chest, takes the throne, and that's when we see the Book of Boba Fett, which is going to be coming December 2021. And so what does this all mean for the future? Well, it seems as if the Book of Boba Fett is going to be a spin-off series, or somewhat of a spin-off series, that's going to air next year. Does that mean that we're going to get a Mandalorian Season 3 as well? I don't know. I doubt that they're going to run 2 shows in tandem, because that's just counter-programming. But at the same time, are we going to just have a year off from The Mandalorian? That's something that I wouldn't mind too much. Is there perhaps going to be a time jump? Because not having Grogu in the show, well, that's a big risk for Star Wars to take, because he's a primary reason a lot of the people watch the show. So now you got to try and figure out, okay, what's going to keep people watching now that Grogu might not be there? Or are we going to have that time jump where Grogu is slightly older, he's completed his training, please dear God, may he not be killed by Kylo Ren? But what does it mean for the Boba Fett show? Now, personally, I'm not a huge fan of the title, The Book of Boba Fett. As a musical theatre lover, it just reminds me a bit like the Book of Mormon. But I am interested to see where that will go. I think Boba was so cool in this season for the episodes that he was used. So yeah, give him a show. See what we can do. But in the Disney Investor Day that was, I think, last week, there was a slew of new shows announced, 2 of which are going to be in the Mandalorian timeline. We've got Rangers of the New Republic, which, at a guess, I would say might have Cara Dune, possibly some other familiar faces pop up. I have no idea where that could be going. But AHSOKA, too. And these are all, according to Kathleen Kennedy, going to converge and build towards one major event that's going to tie all these shows together. Could that be a war for Mandalore? I have no idea, but it just has me excited that we've got so much Star Wars content to look forward to, and at the moment, it's really good. Will there also be moments that will tie into the sequel trilogy? We already know that, well, according to my assumptions, that maybe that was Snoke in the Bacta tank, so is that going to be a contributing factor? Are we going to see the birth of the First Order? Is that what it could be leading to? I don't know! Overall, though, my thoughts for The Mandalorian Season 2 is that it is everything as a Star Wars fan I could have asked for. I think the visual effects, at this point now, they are completely indistinguishable from blockbuster movies. It looks fantastic. If you aren't aware of a technology that they use called stagecraft, it's where they build kind of like part of a set and then surround it with LED screens to basically create the backdrops, and it's immaculate looking. It's amazing technology, and if you haven't seen Star Wars Gallery, The Mandalorian, they brilliantly explain how it's utilized, and wow, it has changed a lot of filmmaking techniques. Ludwig Göransson's score is amazing. I love how he's not trying to just copy John Williams. He's doing something that's distancing himself, but at the same time paying homage. You can't create a Star Wars score without at least respecting the work of John Williams. And also on a personal note, watching this show every week, it just made me feel like a kid again. It reminded me of those times where I would run down on Saturday mornings and me and my dad would watch different sci-fi and fantasy shows, and it gave me that feeling too, because I'd be sitting there watching it with my dad. And ultimately, that's what Star Wars really means to me. It's always had a personal connection that me and my dad can share, and that's probably why I've loved The Mandalorian so much. And so, overall, I'm going to give The Mandalorian Season 2 a 10 out of 10. Love Star Wars. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. Sorry it was a long video, but I felt like I just had to do such an in-depth discussion and breakdown of everything that happened in this show, and I love talking about Star Wars, and I hope, for those of you that are watching, I hope you enjoyed it too. Drop down in the comments some of the bits that you liked in the show. What did you think of Luke Skywalker returning, AHSOKA returning? Where do you think it's going to set up for a Season 3, the Book of Boba Fett? Just drop down any wild theories or things that you liked about the show in the comments below. And as I'm sure some of you are aware, we're so close to completing the road to 300 subscribers, so if you are watching this video, you have enjoyed yourself, but you are not yet subscribed, please click that subscribe button, and I promise you, you won't regret it. Thanks for watching. If you have enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more, please make sure that you click that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. All the links to my social media accounts, my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and my letterbox are all in the description below. And if you haven't liked the video, what are you still doing here?